to Sense Space. Today, sitting down for the first time with Mr. Samuel Barnes, co-creator of Schizo FM, and someone who I've been observing at distance, popping up in the field, in the philosophy space. He's been contributing to dialogues, and I think you write as well, and definitely pop up in the Twitter sphere. And yeah, it really just struck my curiosity to finally sit down and have a chat and get to explore the meeting of worlds between us. So good to have you in the space, Samuel, and yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Jacob. Always nice to meet new people. And yeah, so it sounds the way you describe sounds like you've been like a hunter stalking its prey almost, which worries me a little bit.
Well, no, I haven't been. No, no. Sometimes the curiosity to speak with someone is like a slow building, and sometimes it comes just there's a spontaneous arising, and I'm just like, yeah, I think I'd like to have a chat with that person now.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was the latter. So it's good to have you on. Maybe we can start with a little introduction. Where are you coming from with Schizo FM? Why are you engaged in conversation publicly, and what's been some of the animating themes of your journey into that?
Yeah. So maybe just give some plugs, I guess. I right now, obviously, yeah, I write. So I've got a Substack which I've been publishing more regularly on. If you want to go read some stuff on there, always like to have more subscribers on there. I have a couple books out, so you can find these Amazon, Gumroad, any place really where you can get books really. So I've got Missing Axioms, which is about nihilism and generally about ethical questions. I've also got the Iconoclast, which is about the limits of philosophy, a study of Hume and the original skeptics. As you mentioned, yeah, I've got a YouTube channel and a podcast. So I do Schizo FM with my friend Owen Leishon, which is a bit more. I wanted to make it a bit more like fun and tongue in cheek, because I think these kind of conversations are great, but I think get a bit serious sometimes. And then basically, when I want to speak to someone, I invite them to have a separate conversation with me on something called Mutually Assured Conversation, which you can find on my YouTube and on Spotify and stuff. So it's basically just an excuse for me to talk to people, that one. But you can find all my links if you go to samuelbarnes.com. That's where you can find all my stuff if you're interested in any of that. I suppose kind of past the plugs, like why you do all this stuff, basically what's the point of doing all this stuff, is that like lots of adults fresh out of university, I was working a job which took up a lot of time, but I felt that something was missing a little bit. I needed kind of something to do on the side, and I didn't have any brighter ideas than to go to like one of the University of London like open evenings and just like talk to some random professors and stuff. And I was thinking like, oh, I like history books and stuff. Let's do history or whatever. But I had just had this I can't even remember the content of the conversation. I just remember, it's weird that, isn't it? When you've had a meaningful conversation. This was years ago. So you've had a meaningful conversation. I can remember the room. I can remember what it smelled like. I can remember the face of the person I was talking to. I can't remember the name of the person I was talking to. I can't even remember what we spoke about. But I walked out of that building and I was like, oh, I'm going to do philosophy. I didn't really know what philosophy was at that point, but I was like, oh, this sounds weird. This is like weird. I want to do something weird. Because again, like, fresh out of university, I was working in an office, and, that comes with its upsides and downsides, and I was like, oh, this seems kind of liberal and artsy, and let's do this. This sounds like fun. So I started doing that on the side as like evening classes. And that was great. It was great to, get introduced to all these great thinkers, even if on a, even if on a master's level, it's still pretty surface, I would say. But I eventually started reading away from maybe the mainstream philosophers and more in finding stuff on like Substack, reading philosophers like Nick Land and realizing that, oh, philosophy can be weird and interesting, like more so than what I even initially found. So I started writing in a more, people have described it as more of like a conversational style. And this got me marked down a lot in my master's. So I didn't get the best grade in the world for that degree, but I got it. So there you go. But I just continued basically. I just continued that thread. Um, Started writing like a blog. I just decided I was going to put something out every week. Um, and I'm not a particularly prolific writer, I wouldn't say. So that's why you end up with a very punchy book like Missing Axioms. That was my first book. Um, which is, you know, if you that's what you're looking for, it's great. You know, it's something you can read in a weekend, or you can read a little bit every day and get something that's got the depth of scholarship, but not like the density of most philosophy, I would argue. Um,
Mm.
so I continued that thread and decided that, like I said, I wanted to start. There's some people online. I was like, oh, I'd like to have a conversation with this person, and everyone, you know, everyone's got a podcast these days. So I was like, well, it's kind of a very cliche thing to do, but I was like, oh, it's like that's like a good excuse instead of like reaching out to someone like give me 2 hours of your time for free. I just want to talk to you. Oh, that's I don't know. It feels more. Oh, I've got a podcast. You can come on my podcast, sort of thing. So that's just kind of how it started. Um, and then yeah, I would recommend people go check out Schizo because it is more if you want something a bit more fun to listen to. It's good because me and Owen went to the same like college for philosophy, so we know each other through that. And yeah, I don't know. We had a conversation. We would talk regularly, and I don't know. I think I was like trying to get somewhere with my YouTube. So I was like, let's have an excuse to do something more regularly. Let's just do it. That's what we did. I wish there was some grand architectural reason to everything I'm doing, but there really isn't.
Yeah. Well, sometimes there's, you know, a mysterious organizing force behind all of it. But I want to zero in a little bit first on missing axioms and your experience in university, and then maybe Schizo FM after. As my first question is like, were you satisfied with what you experienced in university? Did you come away like a lot of people who enter into this space are often, to whatever extent, disillusioned with the university, disillusioned with the academy? Did you have like a kind of so-so experience with that? And then, as regards the book, like that to me, I know with what the landscape of publishing is a lot easier now, but still the undertaking of writing a book is quite significant. So what was that? What was the process of actually being like, I'm going to write a book, and how long did it take, and what was the journey with that like?
Yeah, so I guess the first part of that question is what the university experience was like, and I kind of think unless you're like a really smart, conscientious person, which I wasn't, who goes to like Oxford or Cambridge, where you get more of a classical education, I would argue probably. Because I have friends who managed to do that, and you know they read the Iliad and all that sort of stuff and didn't have to go and do it in their extra work. I've got a bit of a weird path because, like I said, I don't know. I think I'm like kind of smart, but I'm not like the smartest. I've never been the best at anything really. So I went to kind of like a backwater university, and I studied computer science first. That was my undergraduate. Um, so I've got a bit of a strange route into this. Um, and I think, yeah, I think any other university you go to these days, maybe even Oxford and Cambridge now, I don't know. Things have changed a lot. But I would say that I got the most out of the university experience because of the experiences kind of surrounding university as opposed to like the actual lectures.
Yeah.
I think if most people really think about
Yeah.
it, that's kind of like if they had a good time, that's usually what it is. And most people think of like, oh yeah, that means you know you did a lot of partying and whatever, and that's true. But also, you know, you do meet interesting people, and you do wind up in some interesting places, especially if you um, take some kind of impulsive decisions like I did. It's like I went to Germany to study for a year, and then yeah, later on just deciding to switch to a different topic entirely. I do feel like you get out of it what you put in a way. Um, but I feel like, and I again, all those extra experiences that come along with university, I suspect, I don't know, because I was lucky enough to have just been finishing my master's when all the COVID stuff went down. I suspect a lot of that's withered away now. I suspect. I'll have to ask my relatives who are just starting when they get on a little bit. But yeah, I think for people like really looking for intellectual depth beyond, because here's my theory about universities, right? I think like universities, especially, it seems like in the last few decades at least, they're not like places where people go to be any sort of, because this is what people imagine, like people being Renaissance men or something in university, and I don't feel like that's what they do. They're basically basically all degrees. I don't think it really even matters on the subject now, unless, like I said, unless you're going to like one of the top tier universities doing something like mathematics or whatever. They're basically just testing two things, which I would say is no, I would say basically they're just testing for conscientiousness these days. To reflect on the UK example is the Blair government in, I guess, early 2000s, just before the early 2000s, is they had this idea that, oh, everyone's going to be better off if we make most people go to university. And what's happened as a result is what you actually have to do, intellectually speaking, has been watered down a tremendous deal in every single university. And if you look at the entry requirements for universities in the UK, they are like A star for people who do the UK like exams, but the global exams, they're like much lower. They're like, for the American like entry grade, you have to get like C, something like you just to pass, right? Which is, from the American mind, if you want to go to like Harvard or something, is like a fail, right? It's like not going to happen. And I think as an elitist, and I'm not saying this to be like, oh, some people aren't smart enough to go or something like this. I guess I kind of am, but like I shouldn't have been that top percentage that went to any university. That doesn't make any sense to me, because you have two problems, right? You have it's intellectually watered down, and also it's like a debasing a currency, right? The actual value of having a degree is not what it was, like, because, like I said, this is the thing, is mainly what it's testing for is conscientiousness. It's testing for the fact that you can turn up to a certain number of things, and that you can meet certain deadlines at a certain quality, meaning that you didn't literally start it 5 minutes before you hand it in, sort of thing. That's what it's testing for. It basically appeals to that above average level of conscientiousness, but the intelligence, and particularly, it does not test for creativity in any way whatsoever. It does not test for creativity whatsoever. It's got nothing to do with creativity. So it basically, the entry requirements are you have to be like slightly below a midwit or higher, basically, and you need to have like a decent level of conscientiousness. The level of conscientiousness you would need to work in an office, basically. The modern university, and I'm interested to see what it is like around the world, but I suspect that it's just a training ground for the spreadsheet economy at this point. And this is why a lot of people, because I don't know, I thought, the philosophy course I did was very good, but I don't think reading an excerpt, like a 5-page excerpt of Hume or Nietzsche, as like the requirement is really enough. Like, yeah, okay, the reading list says read the whole book, but you don't really need to do that. And I think possibly it's because they're trying to cover like all of philosophy, but yeah, it seems very like watered down. And again, like, you do any writing style like I was doing that isn't basically you would be writing essays that are literature studies. You'd be saying, oh, Kant has this idea A. This person in paper A has said this. On the other hand, paper B. On the other hand, paper C. But I think, da da da. Or maybe you don't even have to say I think, because you don't really have to think, I don't think. So in conclusion, we don't know. I don't know. Like, it doesn't. There's no room for creativity. And the issue was, I understand there's a problem when a professor's, supervising X number of dissertations, and everyone's got their weird ideas about what they want to write. But when you go to, like I did, like three different meetings with three different professors, telling them, and like it wasn't like, oh, I had some vague idea and I didn't know what I was going to do. I was saying, these are my sources. This is exactly what I want to write. And then being like, oh, I don't know, my research is kind of like about this author, so you should read their book and you should write a paper on them. And it's like, well, okay, if this was my job, then I would say yes, boss. But that's not what I think a university should be, and particularly not a philosophy degree.
Yeah. No, I think that's really well put, and it resonates a lot with my experience.
It will. I know that was a bit scattershot, but I think for people who have done a philosophy degree or masters or even higher and have the inclination, have any sort of creativity, they will understand what I'm talking about, you know. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, like even in philosophy, like philosophy departments, there is a worrying lack of creativity in the universities. Like it does feel like, well, I mean, I don't know, like all the universities I went to were very like modern, like even like ex polytechnic ones, and they're starting to feel like a little bit like, especially the architecture feels a bit more like a shopping mall than it does a place of education or an airport terminal or, you know.
No, you're taking me back to some absolutely awful seminars I had on my history degree at Queen Mary. And Queen Mary catches a lot of international students and a lot of
Yeah,
students from like greater London. And I mean, there was some classes that were stimulating, but for the most part, I felt like I was contributing the most and showing up for these seminars, actually wanting to have a rigorous conversation. And what I got was like some of these classes, man, it was like they just hadn't done the reading, and it was so painful and awkward. And the seminar leader would try and make something out of it, and it would just be like 10 people.
yeah.
They'd ask a question and nobody would say anything. And that's disappointing. But more deeply, yeah, I've been talking with Daniel Garner and Tim Kubik about this, about the way in which education is actually basically in service of the marketplace to a very significant degree. And yeah, it seems to be mostly the academic game of getting into those positions, and the kind of political instinct that's needed for it is very like bureaucratic. It's like the kind of person who can do well in a bureaucracy is the one who will do well in a university department. And therefore those people, like, they don't select for creativity when they're marking your dissertation. And I had the exact same experience. It was like trying to do like something radical and integral and multidisciplinary during my master's degree about Islam and modernity, and then like having the professors be like, well, it would be much better if you just did ISIS and social media like everybody else is doing, or like something kind of linear, something straightforward. And so
Then you can use the
I,
Guardian as a reference.
sure. But I wrestled a lot with it in the years afterwards, and I don't know how it's been for you, but you sort of found your peace with it. I'm slowly finding mine, but that reality that the most important experiences I got from university and the value I got from it was like exposure to people, going on a year abroad in San Diego, which led to me having my first acid trip, which was very consequential and then led to lots of other things. But the actual value of the degree plummeted almost the moment I received it. And then like you don't realize that you're taking on a substantial increase in your tax burden for the next 30 years when you've never paid taxes before, which is the condition of everyone going into university. So that's that's a lot. And I think that the energy of that debt also, like, there's a way in which that also, it functions as a graduate tax in the UK. It's not really a debt in the same way American students have, but
Yeah.
I think the psychological energy of that also is like anti innovation, anti creativity, anti daring, because it kind of just it's weighs you into um not taking risks, really.
there's a couple things I want to say on that. I mean, the first thing I want to bring up is that in terms of the corporate ethos and where the university is and stuff, is um, Joshua Hanson's really good on this, and people should pick up his book, Tractatus Anti-Academicus, which I guess is a sort of parody of Wittgenstein. But he's very good on this. How people get the right instinct that, oh, the university is becoming like a business, but it's strange because none of them are at least like businesses, at least businesses in the for the most part are kind of bound by profit or revenue and relationships and these sorts of things. For whatever reason, I think it's a lot to do with endowments and I guess sponsors, and I guess for countries like the UK, I guess it would be more to do with government like funding. But they've gone a weird direction where instead of it being market driven, that they became more corporate. I think they just sort of decide. I guess the admin staff started swelling, and they just decided, oh, we need to make this like a business. They need to make this more corporate. And at the end of the day, like they're not like a productive sector, but they have all the hallmarks and trappings of a business, like marketing teams and just bizarre stuff. And yeah, the actual learning staff are vastly outnumbered. I don't know a case where it isn't vastly outnumbered by like admin staff, corporate staff. Um, the second thing I wanted to say was, what was the second thing I wanted to say? I thought your point about, a degree is a lot like a car. It loses its value when you drive out the showroom, right? It's very strange. But yeah, I think it's very weird because I mean, look at the path I took, right? Like it's weird. You mentioned like having your peace with it. I don't like begrudge or like feel vengeance about any of the decisions I made or experiences I had, because it took me to interesting places at least. It doesn't necessarily mean good or bad, but I've been some interesting places and had some interesting experiences, that's for sure. And I've ended up in a good place, I think, overall. And it's weird. It's almost like if I didn't go to some backwater polytechnic and do computer science in probably one of the worst departments in the country, that I wouldn't have got there, And I wouldn't, I don't know, like you said, when I say like university is about the experiences you get, the people you meet, I'm not like arguing that, oh, I met some amazing people at university. I actually kind of learned what I don't like in people and what I don't like in places and what I don't like. I did also meet some amazing people who are still like friends and contacts and stuff, but it made me realize a lot about how people operate and how people kind of navigate the world. But I do think another thing you mentioned, I mean, the student loans thing is weird. I think for people who study in the UK, we've got a very soft version of that. And like you said, it's more of a tax. And one clever strategy you can do, which I've been on both sides of, is just deliberately not earning enough to have to start paying it back. Yeah. Which is something you can do as long as you make sure your main hustle is like below a certain threshold. But yeah, the US what situation is absolutely mental, because I believe it's the only form of debt you can't default on.
Meaning you can't declare bankruptcy and eliminate it,
no
kind of thing.
No, you'll still be subject to like legal penalties no matter what. And actually, in fact, one really messed up thing I found out recently is that if you marry someone with US student debt and they die, it passes on to you. And I think it passes maybe onto their dependents as well, like they've got children, which is, for something that we're not expecting to pay off, is scary stuff, I think. And like you said, it's weird. I feel
like a mafia debt, or like a medieval.
It is. It's indenture. It's something like indentured servitude, because it's like every other kind of debt you can default on in the modern system. Like it's strange. They have a special permission for whatever reason. But I think it's going to lead. It's going to lead to part of meltdown. It's going to lead to part of decline, because the fact that these have been watered down, the value of them has been watered down. And obviously the economic situation is getting a lot worse now. The geopolitical situation's, not looking great. Like a degree doesn't mean you can emigrate anywhere you want anymore. That's for sure. Definitely for sure. And lots of people are going to be feeling like, even people who did STEM degrees now, I think, are going to be feeling like, especially, even the tech sector is kind of is declining, which people never would have expected even 5 years ago, I don't think. Are going to be thinking, well, I was kind of duped into this. I'm now saddled with this debt. I've got this thing which doesn't do what it used to do. And whether they go the route of, okay, I'm just going to live in my parents' house and be a NEET or whatever, or they're going to go the route of, okay, let's go and join some sort of revolutionary leftist organization, or let's, start doing the whole identity politics thing. I don't know. I think it's just going to lead to unrest and decline, because I think that for people who don't go to university, the sense that they've been abandoned by the elites has been present for many decades, but they don't have as much power in the system as the more managerial types. And I think a lot of people are clocking out the system. Right now, it's telling people clocking out the system, people not voting, those sorts of things. But I think, that's when the system loses its legitimacy from a power political standpoint. But the next step is when, anyone who's read a bit of history knows about this, is when people start feeling their security is threatened. And that's happening in a lot of traditionally high trust societies like the US, the UK, everywhere in Europe, I guess now, is becoming more low trust at an increasing rate. Security is threatened, energy is threatened, food will be threatened as a result, and food is becoming more threatened as corporate interests buy up farmland and do God knows what with it. And that's when people are going to turn back to their more base instincts. And at that point, it doesn't matter what degrees you've got because you're hungry. That's honestly what I think the future holds for most of the planet.
I really appreciate what you tuned into there. I'm curious about the security. Like, are you talking then about security from the state, like your liberty from molestation by the state, or are you talking about security from getting mugged on the street, or security from a foreign power? Or yeah,
that's a good question, because actually I always think about high trust, low trust. It's like, well, can you trust the people around you? But for anyone who doesn't, well, I think lots of people kind of were gobbling up what was coming out of 2020, basically. I think a lot of people clocking out of that. A lot of people, I've had a weird situation where at the time I was, realizing that, I can't trust certain people, but now those same people I knew that were totally buying into that stuff are saying that they were against it all along, that sort of weird post hoc thing. But yes, you're right. This is the crazy thing, is that, it's not like, there's crime on the streets, but like, I don't know, like, we can't, if, here's the thing about the government, right? Most people, the mass of people from a government, they're not really like ideological about it. They want security, they want prosperity, and what else do they want? I guess, yeah, security, prosperity. They want to be able to get on with their own business, right? And across the West, governments are failing at doing that. So yeah, I suppose you're right, and I think that will lead to political instability. But I am actually mostly talking about like high trust, low trust in the populace, because it's very clear. Now, where you want to go with this, I don't know, but it's very clear that the demographics have changed across the Western world. Okay, that's obvious. Okay, what segments you think are the problem, I don't know, but they seems to be happening at an increasing rate. It's obvious in the US. It's happening in certain states at a very fast rate. What's very confusing, and this points out the contradictions of the system, is we supposedly have a conservative government that's considered right-wing, and everyone blames everyone has these bugbears about immigration. They blame them on Blair basically. But under the last decade of conservative rule, this is conservative, apparently the right wing party who, are, you know, rabid against immigration. It's increased, it's gone up, and it's its highest rate ever every single year. It's its highest rate ever. Um, and again, what specific group or what specific reason you think that people have low trust, I don't know. But all I know is that even compared to 7 years ago when I moved to London for a job, you like really have to like watch yourself in cities like that now. You really have to watch yourself. It's not like before where, okay, don't leave your like laptop out in a coffee shop. Like it's like, well, don't like have your phone out while you're walking down the pavement, or else some guy on a moped's going to come by and steal your phone. Um, to give another example, I was in San Francisco last year, being completely like ignorant. My place was, isn't like a nice neighborhood I was staying in, but I was like, oh, I can get the train to here, and I can walk through this place called the Mission District. And I was like, I was walking through this place. I didn't really feel. I guess I'm lucky. I'm like relatively tall, not the
English.
thinnest like guy in the world, right? But I didn't really feel like threatened. But like on a 10-minute walk, seeing like a dozen people just like shooting up in the open was very shocking. And I was like, oh, I guess that's just how San Francisco is. But then you speak to people who've lived there or live in that area, and they're like, oh no, it's completely changed in a very short space of time in the last like maybe decade, but maybe even 5 years.
Mm.
And it's strange because you look back and everyone's always talking about the imminent collapse, these sorts of things, whether they're a libertarian and they're like, oh, the Federal Reserve's debt's going to get too big and it's all going to collapse. But I think now we're in a really strange position. I feel like it does something about it feels unique, and I think it's felt unique since 2020, basically. I would say, and just to give a contrast, right? I have gone to Asia for the first time, and for the first time since I was probably a child in rural England, like realizing that you could, like, I can leave my laptop in a coffee shop and go to the shop down the road and come back and it'll still be there. Like there are dedicated seats on the subway for pregnant women and elderly people, and people do not sit in them, even if the subway's full. That is a high trust society. I don't know which, because there's pros and cons to this, right? High trust societies can be more restrictive in other ways, right? But I'm just saying there is now a increasing and stark difference between these two things.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, I think you're putting some really important brushstrokes on the canvas here. And there does seem to be some combination, like the left will point to this is a consequence of the economically unjust system that's been compounding, and the condition of those people in, let's say, the poorer boroughs of London has progressively gotten worse. And now they'll say there's a spirit of desperation taking root. And now that's why people are resorting to stealing people's property or assaulting people in,
Yeah.
in
And
the middle
and
of
to
the
be honest with
day.
you, the right is just as ideological because they will say it's just immigration or it's just cancel culture or something stupid like that.
And I don't think either of those is sufficiently um, getting to what I feel like you're getting at, which is something more fundamental in the fabric of shared value. And that does seem like that's the other piece that I want to really bring in here is like in the context of London, also the context of the United States, it's like to some degree, like what you're seeing on the streets there feels like a symptom of like a moral rot, or something in the relational fabric is just rotten away, some shared common ground has given way. And then I think it's well put. I think that if you have accelerated immigration into a context that doesn't have a strong social fabric, um, a lot of what I recognized kind of studying the Islam in the West problem for 4 or 5 years was that we in the West are the most like self-doubting, self-critical culture. We're a postmodern culture that is laden with guilt for our imperial era and for the sins of the past that we're focused on. And other cultures are not riddled with self-doubt. Um, there are more self-confident, pre-modern kind of modes that aren't really concerned with um, that come from a place of knowing what the truth is, um, and simply seeking to expand the context of that. So that's a little bit of the dynamic going on with Islam in the West. But I feel like what you're pointing to is not just about like a religious divide. It's also like it's like how much new people can you add and still maintain a sense of shared context in a period of time is probably like you could probably devise some sort of metric or calculation for that. And then if you applied that to certain places in the Western world, you definitely find it's being exceeded. And it seems like that kind of Tory government, that conservative government, it still feels like the conversation is very economic and financial and abstract at the level of what government talks about. And there's not a great deal of deep, meaningful sense of um, values, community, what's the more beautiful future we're building, not as like something that sounds good for party conference, but like something that's actually deeply felt and articulated by the leaders in relationship to the people from which they come. That's just not it's not the reality in the UK. So I think there's very few people who have faith in our political class, and there's a really this is going to make the conversation impolite, but there's a really wanky kind of cultural milieu that you enter into once you get involved in politics. And a lot of what I learned at university was spending time with young labor, middle class people who are all aspiring to become parts of the Labour Party and all competing to prove who was more working class than the other one. And none of them being working class. And me being the actual one who grew up on an estate amongst them was like the one that didn't get to succeed in that hierarchy of class. So it feels like there has to be some sort of richer, more meaningful space in culture from which, you know, wisdom and value can actually start to take root and take form, and that starts to become more attractive. And I think that that's been going on over the last several years. And even when you meet people who are like that sort of typical, like, dad was a conservative party member and my only goal is to become an MP sort of thing. Those people are getting into Jordan Peterson and things like that. And that there is to some degree, even within the like hyper political, there's, at least on the conservative side, there does seem to be like a looking out for something deeper and more meaningful.
Yeah, I was even worse. I was never a card carrying member, but I was a member of the Socialist Party, and this was, you know, just a completely intellectually dishonest time of my life. I think I got into it by watching a few YouTube videos. I never actually read like any Marx or anything like that. It's the most embarrassing thing ever. Um, but yeah, I think the issue with anything to do with politics or leaders today is that um, we've got managers, we haven't got leaders. Um, like it doesn't matter if these people in the Tory or Labour Party, they went to these universities we're talking about. They learned the managerial education that they needed to be politicians, basically.
Well, I was the only Lib Dem briefly amongst a bunch of Labour students, and you were just saying that you actually was it the Socialist Workers' Party or which?
No, I was the Socialist Party, which was split from the Socialist Workers' Party,
Hey.
which is classic leftism, isn't it? Really. Um, no, what I wanted to say on what you were saying about, it seems like all the main political parties are the same, and they're full of certain types of people. And what I want to say is that what we have managers and not leaders, basically. And what I wanted to point out as well is that that comes back to the problem that all the people who are like in politics now, pretty much, have been educated through the sorts of universities we were talking about. The problem comes from the same place. They've been taught how to have like corporate politics. Basically, they've been taught how to play the game and work their way up in the party ladder, just like someone who would rather go into the corporate ladder would work their way up the same way. It's completely different. It's not. There's no like leaders like there was in the past. It's weird. I don't know if that's a problem of democracy as such or whatever, but yeah, I did want to say as well what you were saying about, because you're pointing out a lot of different things like maybe the collapse in trust in society is about religion, maybe it's about morality, like moral fibers falling apart. But I don't think it's any one of those things individually. It's something like you said, it's something like shared values is not there. And one thing that's very interesting about a country like the United States, and it's the only way it's been able to kind of do this is by virtue of its geography, I think. But there is probably there's more difference between someone who lives in Virginia and someone who lives in California than there is between someone who lives in, say, Germany and the UK, I would argue. There's more difference between those two people, and they're able to kind of brook that because they've got that kind of, they've got a kind of political separation and they've got a geographical separation. But Europe doesn't really have the virtue of that geography or that kind of politics, and the problem is there has become as much of a difference between someone who's from London to someone who, even someone who lives in like Surrey, which isn't even that far away at all geographically. It doesn't take you even an hour to get there on the train. But, you're in London, the city state. Yeah, it's actually a city state, the way it's run, the way it's constructed. Like everything there is a city state. You take a train for 45 minutes and you're in actual England, the country, it's a completely different country. And it's strange how, I suppose that libertarians always thought, you could solve all these problems by having a patchwork. Well, it's like, guess what? With neoliberalism, you've got it already, and it sucks. So there you go. But yeah, again, coming back to one of the things that people always point out is the immigration thing, and there's definitely something there. But I think that kind of brings me to something that I am coming around to being one of my, because I haven't really known I know what I've thought philosophically for a while, but I haven't really known what I've thought politically for a while. But one thing I think I would attest to at this point is particularism. And what I mean by that is that it's definitely in the constellation of ideas I would call rightist, but it's distinctly anti-liberal. And what I mean by that is it liberal in the sense that liberal in the global sense, I would say, because and this is something that goes way back. It goes way back because to take a good example, one that's I think would be clear to both of us is that I would argue that Britain, so the union of the countries, but also the project of the empire. Yes, it's imperial and colonial, but it's actually a more universal way of looking at people, I would say. Because even in the British Empire or in Britain, you can be a Hindu who's from India and be British, and I think that's true. Like that's a true thing. I mean, it's you can have a look at the leader of the country, and you can see that that's true. And I wouldn't argue against that. Um, I think that's one of its that's something that's led to where we've gotten. But what I would say is that okay, yeah, you could be British, but you'll never be English. And as an Englishman, I'll never be Scottish. It doesn't matter if you put us under the Union flag. There's different ethnoses going on there. That's the issue. And I know that the starkly racial question it's a scary one, and for good reason, because the modern concept of race, and I would say this is one of the great contradictions of liberalism, is under liberalism particularly, it has lent in to the visual prejudices that it claims to usurp.
Mm-hmm.
It has lent into that, and this is true through ridiculous uses of language where somehow people of color is polite, but saying colored people now isn't polite. Like I don't understand that, but and like somehow is it implying that there are people without color? I don't know. It's strange. I would argue I'm more pink than white, to be honest. But anyway, what I would assert is an idea of ethnos, and I guess what I mean by that is still pretty vague in my thinking. I need to do some more thinking and writing on this. But ethnos is some sort of constellation, yes, of your ethnicity, but also of your culture, and your political history and the way that the technologies of the society are ordered. Now, to give you is Islam, because you know a lot about Islam, is a good contrast because um, Christianity, in lots of ways, is very insistent on um, more of a monogamous family structure, and other cultures have been more liberal with that. That's what I mean when I say social technologies, because I do think something like monogamy is a social technology, for example. So that's what I mean by particularism, and I think that is the start of an antidote to this mush we've ended up with, where you know it's mush in the way that we're organized, but it's also mush in the way it's rotted people's brains. Because anyone with a rightist impulse immediately jumps to free speech or immigration, and anyone with a leftist impulse immediately jumps to economic concerns, and it's just insufficient. It's insufficient as they're insufficient as ideas for us to get anywhere, and they serve managerial powers as forms of containment of any of those impulses.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really good. Um, there's a lot in there. Um, so what I'm hearing in that, and you can help me if I'm missing the mark. Particularism is, in some respect, about deeply understanding difference and distinction between different groups, between different cultures, between different values, and then organizing our orientation and our engagement with the different others, on that basis. Whereas the value system of sort of postmodern progressive multiculturalism has basically been an effacement of difference. And there's a whole interesting discourse about why this is actually sort of an offshoot of Christian ethics combined with guilt from modern history. But effectively, what we've had a tendency to do is deny difference. And there's actually a weird neo-imperial or neo-colonial twist in that, where we're denying difference and then we kind of impose the denial of difference onto everybody else or other
Yeah.
groups. And as a result, and this is why the Islam inquiry took so long, is because it takes a very long time to actually get outside of your own worldview. And so much of the kind of conversation about Islam in the West was actually coming from the perspective of the West in a deep way. And there's a lot of historical layers to that as well. But effectively, we've for centuries been not really encountering otherness and just kind of like integrating it into our own ways of thinking, like imposing Christian theological frameworks onto Islam that don't really fit. Um, and I think there's a huge amount of work in culture creation, culture building, culture bridging to be done that can only occur when you get down to meaningful encounter. And we seem to have gotten into this eddy where we're kind of like political correctness has become, or like social justice that springs out of that has become kind of like a skirting around difference and an effacement of difference and an inability to really meet one another. And it's only in meeting one another the actual possibility of some sort of transformation in that mutual encounter, or some sort of like coming into a real collectivity, like a real collectivity can occur. And as you say, what we have is kind of like a collectivity of convenience. And there's kind of governmental, bureaucratic reasons for why we're doing that as well. But I think it's deeply important. And most of my friends in my life have been people from mixed backgrounds. I love people who are split. I love my half Chinese, half UK, half Indian friends, because they're the ones who actually have to think this through in their lives. They're not given, like the answers aren't given. So they actually have to understand and forge an identity out of the two very different worlds from which they come. Um, and so yeah, it's tricky stuff. And a lot of those people feel like a degree of alienation from Englishness. Um, I think it's great that Britishness holds some of that potential more like the American identity, that, you know, anyone in the world could potentially come and become British through participating in that. I think there's a beautiful thing in that. But as you say, like there's been this quashing of Englishness. It's okay to be Welsh and Scottish because they're more minority, but English is kind of like the worst, the worst of the worst. And to be proud of being English is, to this day, still kind of a taboo and a flag. Literally, the flag of England has become a signifier of racism and small-mindedness, bigotry, and all kinds of antisocial behavior. Basically, is what's associated with that in the press. So,
Which is ironic because we are kind of the worst in a way because we created this liberal mess that hates us. Like we started that. Like what's going on? Like, no, I mean, so the whole particularism point really, like you're right. It comes back to a question of ontology, and again, that's a really annoying word for people who haven't read a fair amount of philosophy. But basically, what I mean by ontology is it's a way that you see the world. Like there's a way, I guess, to give a historical example, like someone stepping off a boat and a European person stepping off a boat and landing in the New World sees the geography and the plants differently. Like the way he can exploit and use the plants and the landscape differently from a Native American. They ontologically view the world around them differently. It's a perspectival thing. And that you know, that hasn't one of the false things of in the Enlightenment, like the appeal to universal rationality, is that hasn't been borne out. Like there still is a difference between, like we've talked about, even the way the Virginian and the Californian sees the world. There's a difference. There is an ontological difference between the way they see. And anyone who's had any religious debate that's between two, even just sects, but like different religions, where you'll have a atheist debating a Muslim, they're having two completely different conversations. And this is the issue, is like, you know, one of the people who now lives in London, which is a more than 50% foreign born city, and, you know, a scared Tory voter who has lived in Surrey all their life and is, you know, feeling the need to white flight even further out. They ontologically view the world in a different way. And again, the appeal to rationality is not good enough. Like, we've got the same access to information and media, yet, you know, sullied by the fact that we like our own pigeonholes. But the fact that there is some sort of universal rationality hasn't been borne out. So I think that's the key thing for particularism, is the ontology. It's the way people view the world. One thing that people forget about empire, because there is a lot of talk about, you know, it's kind of like I don't know, usually they're racially dominating projects. But, you know, in relation to difference, I would argue that most empires, at least where they end up, especially when the managers take control, is they end up being like economic projects mostly. And the empire, like, it's very costly for the empire to like subjugate its you know, vassals and make them learn a different language and all this sort of stuff. They basically, you know, just want to like extract economic value out of them and keep things stable, which is where, you know, this normative assertion where, you know, oh, all the differences, you know, these differences can live together. Isn't it beautiful that you have a completely ontologically different way of seeing the world from your neighbor, but you can live next door to them? Oh, wait, now you're in segregated apartments and you never speak to anyone around you. Oh, okay. And I think, yeah, that's kind of my normative point, is I'm not saying that, you know, a European should never go to Asia or a Japanese person should never go to Europe. I'm just saying it's normative that an English person would be in England, and that there would be, like, you know, Iran would be full of Iranian people and have Iranian food and have Iranian mosques. Like, maybe that's reactionary of me, but that's what it comes down to. Like, I think that is a celebration of difference. That's the world we should be aiming at. We shouldn't be aiming to create a world where you can go to the Sahara Desert and get a McDonald's. Like, that's not a bright future, I don't think. That's not the future I want. I want to be able to go to Japan and it be Japanese and full of Japanese people. That's what humanity is all about. And you know, that ontological difference can seem like a really scary thing, because we have to accept things that go deeply against the morality of our own ontology. We have to accept those sorts of things. So that's one of the negatives, I would argue. But yeah, I think you have the impulse that a lot of people have. I'm not sure it's entirely for the right reasons. They view things like the British project or the American project, and they're like, "Oh, isn't it wonderful that anyone can join this thing?" And maybe this is my rightism, my like anti-liberalism coming out. So I think those are the starts of universalism in a way. And they, you know, the British project and the American project, I would argue they're ultimately propositional. What I mean by that is they're based on just ideas and have no inherent relation to an ethnos, or even more than one ethnos, as they're completely universal. And I would say that coming back to that normative point, the ethical point I wanted to make is I do think that's normatively wrong, because it gives us that nice feeling of inclusion, which is a nice feeling, I admit. But ultimately, I think that it leads to bad outcomes for both the people that created that proposition and the people that are subjected underneath it. Like, it's like anything to do with liberalism or democracy, is we get this mishmash of different things, and the end product is not what anyone asked for or what anyone wants. Like, everyone loses under that system. A particular system is where where I wouldn't say everyone wins, but like more people win than under liberalism, that's for sure.
I feel like there is a. I mean, we're having this conversation in a time where the American project is in crisis, and the American project goes through crisis at various times. It seems to be a historical trend. But right now, it's never been. I don't know that it's ever been more um, in doubt. So that really colors the landscape. But and I take your point, like those ideas, those universal ideals, the ideals in the Constitution, they're kind of Enlightenment universalist ideals that people have to really prescribe to, but people have prescribed to them as a project of integrating many into a whole. It's unrivaled. And I've never seen anything like it in the world, like being in university in California and having like a social group bound together of like people from Thailand, parents, like within one generation, radical inclusion into this project. But on the other hand, it can be a little superficial or other things like that. I'm feeling really interested around a thread that we touched on right at the beginning, which I might actually have to pin for a second conversation, which is to do a little review of the COVID years with you because that was enormously significant for me. And I feel like you've just touched on it. And I know you produced that documentary with, or kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, art piece with Schizo FM about the COVID years and what was going on in the collective psyche of England. But um, I would really love to delve into that further at some point. Um, Yeah, I mean, I'm in a place of looking for answers to these questions, and I think it requires a journey. And being here in Mexico, I have a country where family and social fabric is much more together, where there are festivals, these kinds of things that did exist in England at a time. And the contrast is very striking because we have, it seems to me, almost none. Like in Mexico, like every month there's a holy week or there's some sort of holiday and there's some esoteric local tradition to that region that's celebrated. And kids, when they live with their families, they stay until 27 or 28 normatively. In the UK, we leave home at 18. Family ends in some sense at 18. We have Christmas, we have Easter, maybe. But there's really not much. I don't know. Maybe there's a little bit of maypole stuff going on in Cornwall or occasionally in
I've got a
Dorset,
very
but
funny
like,
story, very funny recent story in relation to that.
please.
Okay, so maybe this was like 2 years ago, um, but my parents are from like pretty like the Shire England, like very like rural sort of England, but they
Whereabouts?
happen to have one neighbor who's a German lady,
Okay.
and I think it was a couple of years ago. My mother, for like everyone on the street, decides to throw like a victory in Europe party. And she invites everyone on the street, but she didn't feel comfortable inviting this German lady. So there are attempts, but yeah, there are some fractures still in the UK.
It does feel like when we have a a big get together, like when there's a real like the only real big fiestas in the UK have been associated with like the royal family. It feels to me like it's only been like queen's weddings and coronations and things over the years when people actually kind of have that like coming together and throwing a street party
Yeah,
or decorating their street, and that's just like that doesn't happen on any other basis. There isn't
yeah.
like a shared religious basis on which that happens, or or more of a common basis that's independent of the royal family, and that
Yeah,
itself is kind of like rapidly losing
yeah.
meaningful currency.
The only other unifying agent that brings people together in the UK is alcohol, unfortunately. That's the other excuse people use. So it is a little bit like bread and circuses, you know, it's like alcohol and the royal family. That's what Britain's all about. Um, but like, I don't know, people view the royal family as some sort of gaudy vestige of something from before, and people view it as, oh, it's great for tourism. Everyone likes the royal family, right? And everyone likes them in the liberal context because they don't actually say anything. They don't have any opinions. So people can project their own ontology onto these people, which is great for the system. As a particularist, I would argue that they're Germans, they're Germanic. They are Saxe-Coburgs. They are not Windsors. They renamed themselves just before the First World War. As someone who his ancestry is like almost entirely Anglo. Like I don't think any of my ancestors went anywhere. Um, I don't know what extent they're English kings or Scottish kings or even Welsh kings. I don't know. I think it's an extent for me. Maybe this is just me getting way too deep into my own rightism here, my own particularities, maybe. But I view them as an extension of that universalist project. You know, like why can't you rename yourself and become King of Britain? Why not?
No, it makes me wonder if on some level there's always a bit of that. Like, sure, there are times when the lineage lasts for 1,000 years, but
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of those 1,000 years is a king from another country coming and becoming king of your country. Like, there is always this kind of like changing of hands going on, and um, like these nations had to be formed out of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is the big part of the ethnos stuff, is it is based on historical precedent, and I suppose the royal family is probably my weakest argument because that's definitely like formed on a historical precedent for sure. But the whole renaming from Saxe-Coburg thing, the whole still marrying the Hanover family every generation, that's 100 years ago. It's not like 1,000 years ago. Like, and again, it's one of those things where it's not like this is why I think they are like universalists because you know the Queen is a thing. The Queen was the person to project your own ontology onto. Didn't matter if you were a liberal or left or right, as long as you weren't a Republican. And even if you were a Republican, you know they were like, oh, you can come and protest, come and lit the system loves to like loosen the steam valve, you know, let the pressure out. You know, they all get a nice day out in London. They all get to you know meet and be happy leftists together or whatever. Um, and again, you know, the new king is, you know, he's all into the WF stuff. I don't like he's not is he WEF? Is that even a European project? I don't know. Like how universalist do we want to get here? How universalist until it starts breaking down? Because it doesn't mean anything.
Hmm.
And I suppose this is why it goes in tandem with the alcohol so well. Because it just, you know, as long as you can turn that part of your brain off that thinks these disruptive thoughts, um, then we don't have to worry about it, do we?
Hmm. Yeah. I feel like we're reaching a really interesting but inconclusive closure in this dialogue, and
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you've touched on I haven't delved deeply into the immigration themes um on sense space, and I feel like what you touched on with that kind of like point of ethnos and English and British, and to what extent that has a lasting importance, and do we want France to feel French when we visit France? Do we want Syria to feel Syrian? Do we want Israel to feel Israeli? Um,
Well, not even just, you know, can we have nice holidays? Like, do the French want it to be French? Probably.
right.
um, No, you're right about the politics stuff. The thing is, it's very new in my thought. I'm just starting to write about it. So these are new thoughts for me as well, to actually apart like to get away from any sort of culture war, because I think like if you don't think about these things properly, then you just get a lot of your views from osmosis. Because just as unfortunately as I think someone who is prone to go to the extreme of like leftism with the socialist party stuff, I kind of rebounded the other way and became some sort of horrible you know GB News rightist or conservative at some point, which was not good either. So um, it's it's been more liberating to actually think about these things, but kind of depressing, I suppose, to realize where you were and where other people are, and how easily people are controlled.
I'm curious. I mean, this is a whole other piece to open up. Far too big for today, but like, how do you like? I'm really appreciating that the ethnos point. Like, you're not coming from abstraction; you're coming from a felt sense of your own Englishness. Um, there's some sort of direct rooting to it, and I'm wondering how does the religious piece fit into that
Yep.
particularism?
That's a
And
superb
like
question.
with Richard Dawkins, the piece that was circulating this week on Twitter
Hmm.
was like that was like a hyper juicy meme, just like cultural Christianity that rejects the underlying basis of Christianity on some level, or can't find a way to connect with it. That seems to be a part of where we are as well. It's like there's a bit of a grappling for like, okay, we're unmoored. What was the root thing? But oh no,
Yeah.
none of us really want to. Well, some people are, but a lot of people don't want to go back to church, and they don't necessarily identify with that energy of we're a Christian country. Like that has been kind of debased a little bit by the right as well for people, and so like to be connected with that in a particularist way is also associated with um, closed-mindedness,
Hmm.
uh, reactionary kind of tendency.
Yep. There's two problems there. Like both thinking and modern people in general are two. They're two. But the issue people have with the G word, I think maybe this is because I'm on the other side of that problem, but I think it mostly comes back to pride. Like people are too proud to either admit they're wrong or admit they don't know or admit that I can live with some logical contradictions in my life or whatever. Like modern people are far too proud. And the second thing is that people are. I mentioned this is for reasons I mentioned before. Like the whole idea of the modern idea of race or whatever is just it doesn't. It's just an absolute boneheaded way of looking at that. And as a result of I guess the ways we perceive history, people are very scared of talking about ethnicity. And I'd be lying. I know I use the word ethnos to try and get away from just saying, oh, race or whatever. But there's more to it than ethnicity, but ethnicity is still a part of it. Um, the religious stuff is incredibly interesting and important because, and my thinking on this is, I've been bouncing some ideas off someone called Joel Carini, who is more on the evangelical American side of things, and he thinks the right needs to move. That's kind of how the right needs to keep itself together, is to come back to having religion as a main point. My argument is that the right, at least, shouldn't be merely religious, because it's mere religiousness which has allowed it to turn the other cheek constantly and just become contained ever since the French Revolution, pretty much. Um, I guess one thing I want to point out is that all these problems we're talking about are political problems. They're problems of politics. And religion is a spiritual thing. I'm not saying it doesn't have an impact on politics. I'm just saying it is a spiritual thing. And I think that it's very, very good to go. It's right to go to spiritual things for your godly problems, to go to spiritual things for your spiritual problems. But politics is not some godly thing. It's really not. It's an earthly thing. It's based on the violence of geopolitics. It's based on sexual selection and all the horrible stuff that comes along with the world basically. And I think that religion, it probably should and definitely is a large part of politics. Um, but we shouldn't pretend it's like that's the key to all this, because it's just not. And yeah, the right likes to pretend that politics is some godly or principled thing, but it's not, unfortunately.
Samuel Bonds, thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for this. Yeah. Really glad we went where we went today. Don't get to touch on this terrain usually. And it's, yeah, proven to be a really unique dialogue. And yeah, I really enjoy your unique perspective and look forward to wrestling these topics more in future and potentially in, yeah, further contexts.